Hi, I'm IKEA, and I was doing some testing of the range DPS meter, and for that I was capturing footage already, and I'm thinking of expanding that into a YouTube video. I've already mapped out in my head how I want to lay this out, and in doing so, I think this is going to be a pretty long video, as I will need to explain a few things, at the very least this sheet, the build, and a little bit about how burst and sustained DPS works to have any of this make sense to anyone trying to follow along. And I will try my best to impart as much knowledge as I can across just from this testing. To outline what I was testing, it's the accuracy of the DPS meter, which is often regarded as completely inaccurate by almost everyone. But someone, Rossi, who is also a common site on Discord and Reddit for Division 2, came up with the idea of testing the range with just weapon damage. Because the assumption is, or has always been, I have had this same assumption, is that the range breaks because there is variance. Variance is down to mostly crit chance, crit damage, and talents. So ramping talents like Obliterate or Overwatch or stuff like that, skewing the numbers and just breaking the range. I have never tested the range without any weapon or variance on the build. I have slightly just tested the range with other numbers spit out by calculations, and those are often, I know the range of reports on those. So in this case, I will try to do the testing and see if we can come to a conclusion. I have not done the test yet. I have done it partially. I have prepared 3 builds. I did the 2 builds with crit chance, crit damage, and some variance in talents. Those already showed that what we already know, the range of reports, and is inaccurate for those. And when I reached the point that the weapon damage testing was going to be done without any crit chance, is when I decided to turn this into a YouTube video. So looking at this chart you see here, you will see that if you do not know these yet, these are DPS charts that I make for calculations purposes. And to first actually make an introduction to it is actually I'm going to show you the build that I'm going to use for this test first, and for that we'll swap this over. You can see this is not really a normal build. It is put together to only have weapon damage and no crit chance, no crit damage. You can see that in the stats. Well, it does have crit damage, but it has 0 chance of critting. So in that case, the crit damage value is completely irrelevant. To achieve this, I had to do it on watch alt, basically. This is an alt that is made just to have scavenging points. I've ran them through Wani, and I will spend these points later and enjoy my well-deserved expertise points in return for that few hours spent. But this is the only way that you can have no crit chance, is if these points are not spent yet. I could go further and do it without complete weapon damage, but I wanted to have weapon damage there because weapon damage technically should, I mean, it does not have any variance built into it. I will show in a minute what I mean with that, but this shouldn't matter, and this should only increase the amount of the absolute value, if that makes sense to you. In doing so, it should be easier to spot what the range is doing. Furthermore, I have also on the gun itself, I have of course no crit chance, as you saw. The rails are empty. Same for the muzzle. I have kept the magazine slot, and that is mostly just so burst length is a little bit longer, just meaning that I have to do the test less. It does not have a damage talent. Neither does the build itself have damage talents on the backpack or chest. Leadership will not apply and would be bonus armor anyway. Overwatch could apply, but I'm just not going to take cover, so it will not be active. The weapon I am using is just something I grabbed from my stash, so it is maxed out on these stats. And yeah, you couldn't have no weapon damage at all, because at the very least, an empty bar of assault rifle damage, even on a weapon, is, I believe, 2.1. Actually, now that I say that, I could have gotten a gray weapon from an alt, but I wasn't planning on doing this as a very elaborate test. It was mostly just me playing around with stuff to see in what ways stuff breaks. So, and I'll also explain that I am on my alt for the few people that actually do know me. Yeah, I didn't lose 10k shade levels. I do have alt account where I still have slots for making alts, because on my main account I do not have any slots left, as I use all 4 character slots for characters, and they have so many stuff on them that I'm never going to delete one ever. So having explained that, let's move on to explaining this sheet that I've been popping up a few times already. So this sheet, for those that don't recognize them, are testing sheets that I have made in the past. These are for, this one specifically is for comparing builds. I have also ones that mostly spit out talent data for one specific build, and one sheet to just calculate some singular stuff out. I will put a link on somewhere in the description down to what where these are, so you can copy them from there to your own Google Drive, and you can fill them in and use them for your own testing purposes. This specific sheet isn't on there yet, and that is this part of the body shot plus crit, headshot, and headshot plus crit is, this has been, I've been working on this and adding it recently, and this one isn't completely on there because I want to test it a little bit more. So looking at this, where the way you should look at this is, these are for testing 10 different builds against each other. So you can have the burst percentages and the sustain percentages of them against each other. And per row is one build. And the 10 rows above here are linked to the 10 rows below here. And the yellow parts are where input can be made. You don't have to. If you don't input anything, it's basically a 0. And you only input things that you need for your testing. So in this case, while all the builds have headshot damage, I'm not headshotting, so I did not input test field. What you will see here is that the fields that are required are the weapon. So in this case, I'm going to test with a Carbine 7. I've input that data in here. I have gotten weapon damage and specific weapon damage for my character in game. Actually, let me show you where you get that, because that is still often a thing that people ask. I clicked twice in the wrong spots. You can see this is the weapon damage of this build, and that is that 110k. And the specific weapon damage and normal weapon damage is added up together. So in this case, it's 95 plus 40, making 135 together. I think I even was lazy and did it as calculation here. So it's 95 plus 40 for 135. That spits out a base weapon damage, and it's best to calculate this base weapon damage from your in-game build, because the rounding does not happen at this base damage, but it happens at the end of the shot calculation. So if you go to any sheets, you will see actually that a Carbine 7 is 47k 12. So here we would have a little bit of rounding issues if we didn't calculate it out here and input it as a number with without rounding yet. In doing so, we get a more accurate number up there than if we were to input a direct base damage number from any of the sheets online, the Reddit sheet, the Discord sheet, or even my damage tables, my burst damage and sustained damage tables. I was going to do this testing with 2 weapons, having already done part of the testing on builds that did have crit chance and crit damage and talents and such. I'm not going to continue with 2 weapons. I was doing that mainly for RPM, but that doesn't seem to make a difference. I could test, if I wanted to be more thorough, I could test something like T82, which has 550 RPM against the Vector, which has 1200. Maybe there more variance would show up due to RPM. But I do not believe that just for this is a simple and fast test. I just want to see actually if the range does not break under these simple conditions. And I'm curious to see if that is actually the case. I would expect it to be better without any crit chance, crit damage. But also I could see it still breaking. So we shall find out together. I have not done that part of the test yet, so you will see me come to a conclusion, and hopefully the conclusion would be obvious in either way. Having explained all this, I am going to give a short introduction into burst and sustain, because you need a base level understanding of it to see what I'm exactly testing. And if you do not know yet, so burst DPS is, I can actually maybe show this. Does it show? Yes, it does. You can see that this is the field of RPM divided by 60. So we're taking RPM, we're dividing by 60 and getting RPS, rounds per second, instead of rounds per minute, because we're doing DPS and not DPM. That is how you get RPS, and then RPS times average shot in this case. Average shot is a combination to get one number that is indicative of your damage output, including crit chance. So this is a number. So in this case, for this build that has no variance up or down, it's pretty easy because the average shot is the same as the body shot because you do not crit. But if we look at the field further, so you can see here the average shot is calculated to be 434k. That is for a build that has 250k non-crits and 617k crits. In this case, it has a 50% crit chance, so both of the numbers get 50%ed and then added that back up to a full number, or to a 100% number, basically. I will go into this in depth probably in a future video if I make more, because yeah, this could be a 7-hour discussion on its own, and I already feel that this video will be very long as I was thinking of it in my head. So I will leave it at that, but I will give another, because I need to explain one more thing. And to do that, I will use a tool in a second. And that is that you can see burst DPS and sustained DPS as the upper bounds for burst DPS and the lower bounds for sustained DPS of your theoretical output. So if you had 100% accuracy and 100% firing time, then the highest value you could reach would be burst DPS, and then you would start falling away as you start to reload towards sustained DPS. Sorry. I will actually make a short little drawing, as I have found that showing is easier than talking about it. So if we had a table, and I actually put it here because I went a little low. So this is time on this line. This line is damage done additively. So if you will start at your first shot, basically being just above zero, whatever your single shot value is. So in this case, for this build, it would be 147k that you see up here. I will actually let me quickly show you what that number represents and that is that if I fire at this training dummy, you see that because I have no crit chance and not critting, I do the same damage value over and over and over again. From that damage value, so that last one where it was 61k was because the target died. This only calculates from that how much damage you have actually done. So from here, let us go back to here. You can see, oh, actually I can, yes, that works well. So you can see the damage last hit was 147k 46. And you can see that that matches up with the calculated number up there of body shots. And those numbers would only match up if the calculation is done correct. If I had forgotten to account for something, or if I had forgotten to put in DTH because I'd forgotten I'm using an AR that has full DTH, then I wouldn't have a matching number. So that matching number is mostly what I actually use the range for, and that is to test to see if my calculation is spitting out a correct value. And that is also usually the only thing the range is recommended for others, is that you can get your damage values of here, because you can also, if you take the in-game values, you can once you have body and body shot plus crit, if you have these values separately, instead of calculating out from stats, you can calculate out from these numbers to get an average shot and go from there, which is a method many other places use. I prefer to do it from, well, the tools I have are mostly from stats, and I prefer that because I can easily go, oh, I took out some value from weapon damage, and now it's 130 instead, without completely redoing all of this. I just make another test to see that it's matching numbers, and then we can continue from there. And that's also easy to just swap crit chance for crit damage and stuff like that. So that is the value of going all the way from stats to an average shot, instead of going from in-game numbers. Both will give the same results. So if you calculate that burst and sustain, as also burst has two other methods that get used to calculate bursts from, all of them spit out the same number. So the methodology doesn't matter as long as the result is the same. Having rambled on for way too long on that, let's go back to that drawing where we have damage on one axis and time on another. So once you start firing, I'll move my mic a little bit away because otherwise I will be very loud in your ear. You will start going up for your firing time in damage. And this will be basically your first magazine emptying out. I actually did not calculate out what a Carbine 7's firing time is, but we can do that actually really quickly by if we take that same RPM divided by 60. So that's 13.1 rounds per second. Its max size is 50. So it will be firing for 50 divided by the rounds per second. So in the case for an awkward number of 790, you get 3.7 rounds per 3.79 seconds of firing. Let me actually make this a more legible number by just going like that. So let's say it's 3.8 seconds of firing. So going back over here, so that would be it. So this would be here for, in the case of the Carbine specifically, this would be 3.8 is the point. The magazine empties. Then you go into a reload state. So in the case of the Carbine 7, it's a 2.7. For this Carbine 7 is a 2.7 second reload. And then from that point on, you just keep doing this over and over again till, you know, the heat death of the universe. So if this is an averaging out of your damage just by taking in-game values basically and trying to simulate your in-game output, then one can say that if I take a different color, perhaps actually that would be better. So yeah, let's take red for burst. Burst is this line. And as you can see, it intersects completely with that first. So in reality, if I was a better drawer, those two lines are completely overlapping up to that point when you start the reload. So your burst is, and that is where that statement of burst and first mag usually go together, usually also in the wrong ways, because burst, while it does have a lot to do with one mag, it isn't a value that is derived from one mag, really. But the sustain at that point, if we go to a different color, is a calculation that spits out basically this number. And it's going from the same line of the first shot. It's going to intersect at this point where you reload is complete and you are about to fire the first round of the second mag. And then it does this over and over again. So it goes over here and also intersects there again, going from the second mag, finishing the reload of the second mag and starting to fire the third mag. And we use these values because they are really easy to calculate. So as I showed you, burst is just two numbers, basically. Both are easy-ish to get, especially from a spreadsheet. You just input values and get them. And in doing so, they are simplifications. They are, especially burst is basically the lowest simplified value that is still of any value. Because if you go below that, it is your average damage or your in-game damage value. So many people quite wrongly often look at weapon values and go, oh, if this total damage number is higher, then that must be better. And there are also still a lot of people that just go RPM, 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 RPM. And while there is, especially on the RPM end, most of the higher burst and sustained output weapons are higher in RPM, it is not their RPM that is the only factor in that. They are balanced in other ways. And one of the things that I will touch on much later when I do a in-depth video is especially burst length, which is something that has been lost to time basically in the discussions of Div 2 weapon damage. So going back to here, what we can say again is that if I pick a third color just for highlighting, burst can be said to be the upper bounds of whatever theoretical output you have. So this line of burst that we have here, going from here all the way to there, is if you're outputting at full accuracy and continuous fire for the complete duration of your fire, then it is intersecting with reality for that length. Once you start to reload or re-aim or you've missed a shot, you're no longer doing burst. But what can be said is your actual play damage, if you were to think of it in terms of what are you really outputting and what is burst DPS, then a build with higher burst DPS should, if you were to do it in a benchmarked way, which isn't practical in Div 2, there's no recording an exact benchmark and then having it replay over and over again. But what you can say usually is that if a build has more burst and sustained DPS, and those two go up usually together, there's some talents that can unbalance that and stuff, but you can say that usually those two go up together, and then a build that has more burst and sustained DPS will be able to do more than a build with less burst and sustained DPS. In the same way that a fast car can outrace a slow car. The top speed is what is changing there, basically. So if that is what the reality is of burst DPS, let me see if I can undo back to having that. Yes. Then the line of sustain over here, that is only true at the starting point, at the point of the end of the reload, and at the point of any subsequent reload. And it keeps going on like that. It hits reality every time you basically start the first round of a new Mac. So looking at this, if you just imagine it like this, these two lines are basically encompassing our simulation of fire, which is that white line. And that is what their value is. So from those two values, you can derive that burst is the upper bound, sustain is the lower bound, and your theoretical damage is in between that, starting with intersecting fully with burst for the first mag, and then it starts dropping more towards sustain as you continuously fire. So having that level of understanding, let us go back and actually do the test that is that we are here for. I will say that I will, for the rest of this thing, if you are mostly interested in just the final result, I'll put a Too Long Didn't Watch, although I should have said this much earlier at the end. As from this point on, it's mostly going to be testing, and that may be less interesting than all of the knowledge I have passed on to this point. So going back to this sheet, just before we go testing, so what we can say is this is the upper bound of, so this is the calculation of the build in game. We know it matches in body shot numbers, so the calculation matches reality. in that sense. We can extend that to say that the burst DPS and the sustained DPS then are likely correct as well. The burst DPS is then 1.9, 36, 109, and then the sustain is 1.13 mil and change. Burst, I'm also going to just truncate down to 1.93 mil and change in my head because I will not remember such a number. So the burst DPS should be our upper bounds of our theoretical DPS. So we're going to fire a mag here and see if we ever go above this number. We should not be able to. The build should not be capable of it. But I know from testing other builds and in the past, and also having tested these other two builds here, that I did something weird there, sorry, that it overreports. Now the interesting part is, does it also overreport when there is no variance? So, having reached this point, I'm going to reset the number. I'm going to fire one mag, and after having fired a full mag, I will reset the range and go again. I will keep the best way would be to fully freeze frame everything and go frame by frame, just for, as this isn't that level of testing, I'm just going to fire at the target and keep an eye on the DPS meter and see what number I see it peak at. And after having done that a few times, sorry, after having done that a few times, I will see if I can come to a conclusion. First off, the two things that I'm going to look for is where it peaks, what is the maximum value that it shows, and I'm going to keep a mental image of what the average is of the number is spitting out. Because usually in real build testing, those two, no. You would, and the only way to know is to have calculated numbers to benchmark them against. And that is why all this preamble is necessary with a spreadsheet and everything like that. So, having said all that, let's actually do the test. So, I'm going to fire and talk and look at the DPS meter at the same time. And as everybody knows that has done this kind of testing, that can be ridiculously hard to recall compensate and look at somewhere else. So yeah, if I miss a shot, it'll invalidate that test, but yeah, I hope you understand. So let us see. I'm going to start firing now. So there, I did not see it overreport by much or at all. I did believe that I saw 1.9 mil at some point, which matches our calculation of 1.93, which is closer than I usually see the range as. But yeah, let's go for a second one. I saw 1.9, but I believe I missed a few shots there. Going again. 1.9 and change. Again, 1.9 and change, and is staying below the burst number on average. If I were to say, if I were to average it out in my head, basically, which isn't how you would test this for certainty, but just as a casual test. There I saw 2 million at a point, which is beyond, which is also kind of why I went the route of having that exact number of weapon damage, because I wanted to have a number close to the largest number of that going over, because that will be easy to spot, because going from 1.9 million to 2 million, if I see 2 million, I know something has gone wrong. So again, we will try. We did not go over. 4 shots left, but that's fine. Well, I fired 4 shots because I had 4 shots left. So going again. I saw 1.9 and we are not over-reporting there. I want to see if I can get that 2 million again. It did not at that point. It did not at that point. It did not go over 1.93 million at that point either, and was below it in a somewhat realistic way. That also seemed fine. There I saw 2 million again at some point, and the average though is around what the burst DPS number should be. And one more. Interesting. So at points, it can go over what our theoretical limit should be, and we should never go over that theoretical limit. There is no, the build does not have the ability to go that fast. It's basically like saying a small car going 200 miles, 200 kilometers per hour uphill. It is beyond the capabilities of it to reach 2 million. But we only saw it once, which is interesting. Normally, the range does overreport by a lot, and I will show this also in later on with the other build. But let us continue with this and see if I can get a different result, or actually get more results and see if I can come to a conclusion. Because currently I am of the mind that it seems that it is acting actually pretty correctly, which is good. It's bad that it doesn't do that as soon as variance comes into play, but yeah, it seems to not over-report when you have weapon damage just as the only stats affecting your bullet damage. Interesting. Yes, I think I'm going to fire one. This will be the final mag that I fire. And yeah, the range is not over-reporting. And as we can see, going back here, so yeah, we have that 1.93. We have exceeded it, I believe, only once. And that could be down to some way in which interval of the shots is calculated server side, or due to frame rate or something like that. I don't believe the frame rate really affects it, but just speculation on my part. So we did see a 2 million at some point, but the average is still below, which also is still weird, because the range should be able to calculate basically burst. It should be rigid. If it was actually completely accurate, and also like netcode and stuff was completely perfect, then it should basically, from the first shot, when it gets the second shot, so it has enough data to actually calculate a burst, it should spit out that burst number because there's no variance at that point. And then it should just continue to have that burst number be the only thing that applies. So it should basically be, as we can see from that picture, it should be that red line up to the end of the magazine, and it should literally be just that red line. It should like maybe have a little bit of bounce, but not as much as it does. So it's probably the interval between shots that is causing that, because we can definitively say with this test that the bullet damage stays consistent. So the only thing that remains is how many shots hit it in a second. And there seems to be some variance in there, either truly with the game code, or just in the way that the DPS meter is set up, because also this DPS meter, of course, is just added in just to calculate that stuff out. It could not be actually, it would be separate from the actual logic of the game, just as that would be easier for the developers to implement. You just go like, okay, calculate whatever it thinks it is hitting, and that's good enough. So actually, I will fire 2 more mags because I just want to see if I can actually see another 2. Because it's interesting that it did still at a point over-report. It was at the starting of the mag, so it would be worse if it was towards the ends of a mag. As towards the start of the mag, it is still averaging up and down. But towards the ends of a mag, it could only be over-reporting if it's actually if it's truly over-reporting, basically, because the more data it gets, the better average it should spit out. So yes, let's do 2 more mags, and then we will move on to sustain. Okay, that seemed the same, just below. And same there. I lied, I'm going to do 3. So here, the interesting thing to me here is, if I basically do the head average of it, here it's under-reporting. I'm having 100% accuracy, but if I were to say an average, I feel like it's in the 1.8 million of it. And especially if I do that and just, I didn't pause it fast enough, but if I had a second person here, actually, that would have been easier for this testing, but you can see it's hovering around 1.8, and that is under-reporting there. So going over to having a different build, if I go to this build, which has vigilance and glass and crit chance and crit damage, you can see, if I go back here, this is this build with the Carbine 7, and it's 5.7 million burst DPS. So for these kinds of builds, I know from experience that the range usually over-reports by a lot. So let us see if we can actually show that. I've already tested this a little bit earlier today, so I'm pretty confident that it will show it. Going back here just really quickly, 5.7 million is the number we should not exceed. It should be our upper bound. So let us see if that is the case. I believe I missed some shots there. Interestingly, the range did not over-report there, at least not to my feeling. Neither there. I'm just actually going to double check that my my body shot crits are matching, and they are 617, just in case I did not save the build correctly or something like that. And going again, or well, I have to reset this first. Sorry. Interestingly, it does not seem to want to over-report. See if this helps. If that changes anything. This character has its world set to normal because it's not a real character for me. It only exists for those watch points. But let's see if heroic, because normally I would always test this in heroic, I now consider, and that is not something I actually considered mattering, but let's see if it does, and how it affects it. And again, if this is getting too long form for you, feel free to jump over to the end conclusions. Because yeah, this is how testing goes. It's you run into stuff, you go like, wait, but what about this and what about that? And I think there's some value in me just showing it outright and fully. So yeah, but feel free to jump over to the end if you really just want to know the end results. Okay, so there I did see briefly it hitting 5.7 million, but it also reported much higher than on normal. So I am curious to see, because there is this quirk of the range, which is that the killing shot, especially, I do not have a very high damage weapon, but what I can do is if I do the killing shot there. So the damage last hit only is the range of the final bullet. So it's not if the final bullet hits and it only does 60k because the enemy only has 60k left, then it reports there as only 60k. You saw, so actually if you keep an eye on the damage to damage last hit, the only two values that should be there are 250. I'll move us over here and explain why I'm saying this. The values would be 250k and 617k. These are, I'm only doing body shots, so these are the two only values that we should see. So as you will see in me just firing, there's a 400 in there, there's a, I'm trying to see if there's a 300 in there. And those are the values of when the enemy dies, but the last shot did not do its full damage. It did not have enough health to take the full damage of that damage last hit. As you saw there was a 4 and a 3 and other values in there. So I'm hoping to actually catch one. Oh, perfect. That is. So yeah, you can see that the damage last hit. So I'm curious to. Oh, I am sorry. I had this, but yeah, in shooting, I did manage to get a damage last hit that was not a value that is that this build actually does. So I'm curious to see if because of that is a way it was underreporting as much as it was on normal, because of course the health scaling will make it less on normal, which is something I haven't considered the range much at all, but I hadn't considered of being a factor in this testing. Also, I'm noticing now that I'm using DTH basically as the value I'm going for. Sorry. As the value I'm going for, but I could have gone for armor, and that may have actually influenced it a little bit. But now also, with that in mind, let's see if I can actually get it to do what I'm used to it doing, and it did in my testing before as well, because I believe I was set to heroic before I started this test. So if I fire, we had around 5 million there. But again, it is still underreporting, which is curious, because I know from testing this earlier that it was overreporting. So I'm going to grab some ammo just to be safe. So at points you saw, I saw 5.7 million in there, which agrees with our calculated number. But if I just double check, I mean, I've already double checked that the bullet damage is matching, so the build is the correct build. And there we saw 6 million briefly. there we saw way above 6 million briefly. So I basically RNG, because here the amounts of crits that you do varies. It's not, of course, having 60% crit chance does not mean if you fire one singular magazine that in that singular magazine you will get 60% of them critting. There's always going to be a little bit of variance. Very obvious if you run fast hands and you see, especially in ARs, you see the amounts of crits. Sometimes you get more, sometimes you get less. But if on a long enough timeline, basically on a long enough fire rate, the average should be hovering around 60%. And in this testing, so I'm actually curious as to if I change. I don't believe I've changed anything, and it was underreporting a little bit, and then now for 2 mags it has overreported, and at one point I saw 6.4 or something. I believe I even saw 6.7, but just in case, I'm going to just repeat this test several times over. And now that we've subbed to Heroic, I'm actually also going to go back to the other build in a second and see if that impacted the results there. So I saw it actually very nicely hovering around 5.7 million. So that, for that mag, it actually, like, if that was the only mag and we took those values, the range would actually be usable. But let's keep going. That's also seemed fine, a little bit under, but... And there I saw 6.5. I am pretty confident in saying that. But the average is still around correct, which I am now actually curious to maybe test if time of day and server activity may have something to do with it, because my earlier testing was done early in the morning. Currently, it is reaching more towards prime time. It's reaching evening. People are getting home, booting up and gaming. So I am interested in testing that, and I will actually maybe make a first comment. And if it's actually something that is the case, I will put it there. And also, if interesting enough, I will make another video out of that. So looking at this again, we're going to go again. Again, I saw a 6 at a point, but if I take the mental average of it, it was around 5.7-ish mil. I'm as a guess, of course, because I'm not a computer, so I don't see every number and calculate it all out as the average. And again, there I am confident that I saw 6.7. So at points, it is over-reporting by a lot, and here it makes sense because we might have had several crits in a row at the start of the mag, and that would cause it to over-report, and then it drops down. But currently, it is actually behaving more than I'm used to. Most of my testing is done way late at night, so I'm curious to see if that is actually a factor. And I had not considered that. Mostly, yeah, again, I do not test the range much or play around in the range much, but there we were I felt that there even the average was too high because we had 6.4s, we had 5.8s, and again, so there, all the way up to the end of the mag, we were over-reported. The average was also above, and the peak was also way too high. There as well, the peak was way too high, and the average was way too high because 5.7 million, again, that is the value it should average out as. And there we were underreported by a lot. So that is the variance of crit chance, crit damage into it. So you basically are, I'm sorry, RNGing your DPS there if you do it with the range. But also you would not know it's wrong if you did not have this calculate value. So it's basically you don't know how bad it is till you see what else could give the same number output. And again, I'm going to do one more mag. And there I feel the average was correct. The peaks were, again, in the 6 millions. So that is bad. That is just easy clickbait is the issue there. And because people will just freeze frame on that 6 million. And in doing so, they'll go like, hey, look at this. My build does 6 point something million when it's actually doing 5.7. And those things matter. As also, a lot of people don't even calculate burst, but just say something. And there I felt it was actually pretty okay. It was underreporting by a lot. Well, actually, no, it was underreporting by a lot. There, the average seemed okay, but the peak was again way too high. There, the average was too high, and the peaks were too high. And that could be down to variance. So I am actually now curious that we have swapped it to heroic, and I am sorry that I did not think of that earlier, but that is how testing goes. So in testing, you just look at stuff and go like, hey, what happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? And that's exactly the journey I want to take you guys on. So it is actually good that we failed in a way. At least let us find out if we have failed in a way. In the build we had tested now, I am confident in saying that it seemed that changing it from normal to heroic did increase the overreporting. I will do some more testing after this video, and if I feel that that statement is incorrect, I will put it in a comment and pin it to say that. So we're going back now to this build. We're doing 1.93 million burst, and let's see if changing the range difficulty has increased the reporting or decreased the reporting. Oh, it has. So there I saw several 2 millions. I saw 2 million one. I saw 2.2 million even. And again, our calculated one is 1.936. So 1.93 million is our theoretical limit, which should not be exceeded by a practical test. Practical test should, in almost all cases, either underreport or report the same. There is no way that the build itself can do that damage again. So going again, I saw a 2.1. We are hovering at. So there, the average was too high and the peak was too high. So it is interesting actually that swapping it to heroic has had that effect. It does somewhat make sense if that last hit is actually going into this DPS calculation as is, because yes, there are bullets that are hitting and doing less damage, but also, well, it's of course more of those bullets. So I was going to say, yeah, so because the health bar is smaller, you are hitting less. You are hitting more bullets that are doing less than their full damage. If that makes sense to you. Actually, I can make it make sense if we go over here real quick, and if I hit that real quick and do this. So if the heroic enemy, I'm just going to, let's make this red. If the heroic enemy has this much health in absolute values, so it has, let's say 4 million, but the normal enemy has, let's say, well, I made it a bit too long, so I'll just say 3 million. In here, our shots are doing this, so in precise intervals. And then one shot over here is not doing the full value. Here, it's the same again, same intervals, but the shot that is doing less damage is occurring more often because of how often the target dies. So here, if we fire for 100 bullets, this area over here is larger, and so less bullets are this area over here. Same or here. So here more bullets. So less bullets are over here, and more bullets are doing that less than full damage. Going back to our graph. I'm going back to here. So yeah, I'm going to unload another few magazines, even though this is getting very long. I'm sorry, but also I am not sorry. This is how testing goes. And yeah, I hope you actually enjoy the journey more than the final destination. I saw a 2.1, but the average seems closer to, at least I feel, to that 1.93. So 2.1 again, but the average felt closer to that 1.93. And that is against what we had earlier, which was that it was underreporting by quite a lot. So again, I saw 2.1 million, but the average, actually the average seemed too high there because we were peaking above it and then averaging out towards it. So the average of those two together is actually higher than that final average. So again, I saw 2.1, and that is to go back here onto the sheet. So 2.1 million, actually let's calculate this out, 2.1 million. And if we divide that 2.1 million by our burst CPS, we are over-reporting by 8.4%, 8.5%. And that is the difference of having strained on a build or optimist or something like that. It's a weapon talent's worth of damage in difference. And while there is still maybe some value in using the range if you like mentally average it out, but that is a big ask. So I would say that is beyond the capabilities of most people, including me. I'm mentally averaging it out in my head, but that is not, I'm in no way confident of that accuracy of what I'm stating there. So you would have to go frame by frame and average it out by every shot. So it is safe to say that the range is bad at it. Well, the range itself isn't bad, but the DPS meter is bad at its job. It tends to overreport, and it tends to overreport in bad ways, which make for easy clickbait, because people will only look at that, like the highest number they will get in that, and that is beyond what the ranges, beyond the upper and lower bounds of so what it is doing. Actually, let me maybe just to illustrate. So the range is saying if you go by that 2.1 million, that's this, and that does not just not match reality in the same way that like burst and sustain don't match reality, but that doesn't match reality in worse ways than that. So For that, it is, yeah, it is completely unusable still. And the variance between, because if I take us back to here, so we had 6.3, 6.4s, and I mean, we had a 6.7 even, but let me take a 6.4. I shouldn't actually do 6.4, but I should do 6,400,000. If we divide this one by our calculated number there, it's even a larger difference. And that is the issue of the range. So this actually will conclude my testing here, because I don't want to make this that much longer than what we have here now. But to go into the conclusion phase, and this will be the point where I put the too long didn't watch bomb marker, we can say that the range is basically useless for its DPS meter. It overreports by too much for it to be usable. Its peaks especially are way too high. If you mentally average it out, it does better, but also having to just look at a number and trying to mentally average it out, I do not believe any human being can do that, including me. And even my doing of it here is more speculation than actual fact. You would have to take every number that it's spitting out and just average them out over how many numbers you have. And that is, at that point, why not just calculate it? That is so much easier to do. And we can also conclude that putting the range in heroic does make a difference. So that's in that same way of, if we go back to here and take a look at my scribblings, like if this is a heroic and this is or let's say, let's say just normal, then because of that likely, I'm not going to state any facts here, I don't know how it works behind the scenes, but likely because of how that shot is getting wasted at the end and having less wasted shots on heroic than on normal per magazine is causing issues as well, which is something that I hadn't considered before, mostly because I never use that range DPS meter. I just use it for the getting the values of body crits and body crits and body normal hits, or if I'm doing a headshot build, headshot values, and just using it for that testing. And for that, it does not matter what it is set at. And I think I was in all my testing also earlier, it had been set to heroic just because all my characters are on heroic, and the range copies that, copies your world difficulty. So that is actually interesting stuff to have learned. So testing wise, this was actually a worthwhile endeavor. I have more knowledge now of how the range works. And I hope that even with how much I have rambled probably in this video, because I'm guessing we have reached an hour mark already, that it is, that you feel that it was time well spent hanging out with me here. And yeah, let me know actually with the comment section what you guys think of this, what you would like maybe to see tested in the future. I am considering actually making more of YouTube videos, and mostly because I've considered it for a long while, and it seems, I feel that I have something to contribute to the discourse of Division 2 content. Mostly because I know a lot more than most, and I've always been someone that really likes to take systems and try to understand them. And in doing so, I have already gone through a lot of systems of Division 2, and I should maybe, instead of just keeping that in my head and just bringing it up whenever it comes in conversation, maybe I should just solidify that into content and make videos so that, more people can know what I know just by me sharing it with them. So yeah, if you enjoyed this, let me know. And if you didn't as well and hated something in specific that you want changed in the future, let me know as well. And without any more rambling for me, I thank you for coming with this on this journey with me. And I will hopefully see you in the next one. Have a good night.